On Christmas Eve, 24th of December 1914, something remarkable happened. In a place of death and destruction, there was a moment of peace. And today, we are at the Christmas Truce Memorial from Christmas 1914 in World War I, here just outside of Ypres. So here we are at the Christmas Truce Memorial, and when you come here they have this where you can see people have laid like footballs and football jerseys, some scarves, and there is a plaque here, some UEFA information and some dedications by Michael Platini and various other sort of UEFA officials. And the reason for it being a football-related memorial is that it is widely reported that during the Christmas truce here, there was a football game between the British and German troops in no man's land. Now the story goes, Christmas Eve, the troops were in their trenches as they would have been in the British front line and the German front line, and soldiers from both sides were starting to try to, in their own way, in that horrible situation, try to celebrate Christmas. There were Christmas trees put up, candles lit, and there was singing. And it's been widely documented that the British troops in particular could hear singing coming from the German front lines. This singing went on, British troops were singing, German troops were singing, applauding each other and shouting kind of Christmas messages across no man's land. Now there's an account by a British private by the name of Marmaduke Walkington, and he explained and told his account of what happened here. I've got it here, so I'll read it now. We were in the front lines and we were about 300 yards from the Germans, and we had, I think on Christmas Eve, we'd been singing carols and this and that and the other, and the Germans had been doing the same. We'd been shouting to each other, sometimes rude remarks, more often than joking remarks. Anyway, eventually a German said, "Tomorrow you no shoot and we no shoot." And the morning came. We didn't shoot and they didn't shoot. And so it began. We started to pop our heads above the side of the trench, but then jumped down quickly in case they were shot. And then we saw a German standing up, waving his arms. We didn't shoot, and so on. And gradually it grew. And so what happened was, during this period of no shooting, people started to actually rise out of the trenches into no man's land. Colin Wilson of the Grenadier Guards records that the truce here actually started with carol singing. We heard a German singing Holy Night, of course in German. Naturally then, after we'd finished singing, there were all sorts of Christmas greetings being shouted across no man's land at us. These Germans shouting out, "What about you singing Holy Night?" Well, we had to go, but of course we weren't very good at that. Anyway, they said, "Meet us and come over in no man's land." Well, after a time we were allowed, a limited number of us. Our officers allowed a limited number of us to go into no man's land. Now this initial action is widely believed to actually be both sides taking the opportunity to retrieve their dead from no man's land. So we have to remember this was still a very tragic place, very sad place, and there would have been casualties all over the place. And so initially this period of ceasefire was taken advantage of for troops to be able to come into no man's land safely and remove their fellow comrades who had passed away or died in no man's land. But then it developed, and the stories are told that soon after that, troops actually began to exchange things with each other. You know, the cigarettes, the wine, the rum, brandy were actually shared between the German troops and the British troops. Now there are accounts of the gift giving as well. George Jameson recalled that when some of his men returned, he said, "Keith and Philip Ridley, two of my section, came dashing into the billets during the morning and said, 'What do you know? The Jerrys are out on top. They're walking about. They're dishing out drinks and cigarettes. There's no fighting going on.'" And so there are accounts of those gifts being exchanged and that gift giving, as is traditional with Christmas, in the middle of no man's land. And it's quite hard to fathom. Now, where we are right here, where this memorial is, it's important to note that didn't actually happen right here. Where this memorial is set up is actually behind what would have been the British front line. So over here, the British front line would have run across this field, probably about level with this big tree behind me. And then further over, where you can hopefully see those buildings in the background, that's about where the German front line would have been. So somewhere over in between the two is where this actually would have happened. And that is where it's widely believed that this football game took place. So whilst they're not real, they are recreations. It's worth noting that there's a couple of trenches that have been sort of recreated here by the memorial. They have two across from each other, so I suppose almost to kind of demonstrate you have what would have been a British frontline trench, and then what would have been a German frontline trench, and then a patch in between no man's land, which of course no man's land would have looked a lot worse than this nice patch of grass that is here. And then the memorial is just over here behind us. So this gives you an idea. It's not the real place, as I said, that's further over behind us, but it gives us an idea of what kind of environment that this would have happened in. Now, I think it's important to note that this still was the front line of a war zone, and this truce was not observed everywhere. And in fact, there is an account here by Clifford Lane of the 1st Hertfordshire Regiment, who said, "Later on in the night, there was a great deal of commotion going on in the German front line, which was about 100 or 150 yards away, I suppose. After a few moments, there were lighted objects raised above the German parapet, looking like Chinese lanterns to us. The Germans were shouting over to our trench. There's no doubt about that at all. And before we could take any action or do anything, we were ordered to open rapid fire. Which we did. The Germans did not reply to our fire, they simply carried on with their celebrations, ignored us completely, and were having a very fine time indeed. We never did anything else but simply continue in our wet trenches, trying to make the most of a bad job." So the truce was not observed everywhere, and in fact on some sections of the line there was still fighting, and in fact there were casualties recorded on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day 1914. Now Chris from Vlogging Through History, who a lot of you will know, he's been here with me this morning. He's been filming some of his own content for his channel, and he pointed out to me that in the cemetery just over here to the side there are actually gravestones with the 24th of December 1914 noted on them. So we'll go and check those out in a second. So yeah, here we go. This is the grave of Private T. Delaney, Royal Dublin Fusiliers, killed 24th of December 1914. So unfortunately this wasn't a place of peace for everybody on that day, and it might be that he died of disease rather than fighting, but still there were deaths here on the 24th of December. Now, the accounts of the football game themselves, sometimes you hear accounts that this was a kind of organised football game, messages shouted backwards and forwards, you send a team, we'll send a team, and goalposts set up, and there was actually an organised football match in no man's land. And there's a lot of kind of information that suggests maybe it wasn't quite like that. But what certainly happened was there was a truce here, and people did meet in no man's land. There are photos that show British and German troops together in no man's land. So the truce definitely happened, and what I would imagine, and certainly my feeling on it, is that probably there was a football. It probably was kicked around, probably between the German and the British troops, but whether or not there was an organised football game is something that probably, who knows, maybe it happened, and maybe perhaps more likely it didn't. But it doesn't matter. The thing that we need to remember, and the thing that we need to take away from here, is that football is something that brings a lot of joy to people, and sometimes upset, but a lot of joy. And if that contributed to a moment of peace in an otherwise horrible, tragic situation, well then hey, football played its part in what, at least for that moment, was a Merry Christmas.